Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to install the camshaft in the engine. Now normally, and this is our cam that we purchased, this is what we call, the slang term for it is an RV cam. There's really actually no such thing as an RV cam. Basically what it is, it's a torque cam. The cam comes with a card that gives you the specs on it. And what it is on these torque cams, it's an upgraded cam load profile that actually helps the engine make more low to mid-range torque, gives me a little bit more lift and duration on the camshaft. If you need a thorough explanation of lift and duration and all that, I actually have a cam degreeing video. I think it's part 8 of the stroker build. If you want to check it out, we go through and degree a cam. I'm not going to get into all that with this engine because, you know, with the lower performance cams, the stock type cam or the RV cam, we just do a visual inspection on them, and I actually check the load profile. Once I get it in, I check to make sure that it has the right lift and duration. There's a couple ways that you can do that. One of the ways that you can do it is you can actually, let's say you don't have a dial indicator or a lifter bore gauge or anything like that. And we have lifter bore gauges, but the thing about this particular engine on the 4.0, it's really hard to get a lifter bore gauge in there because the lifters are down inside there. And you actually have to put those in before the head comes off on this particular engine design. And so one of the things that you can do is you can actually take a micrometer and you can measure your cam lift basically by taking a measurement here, and I'll show you real quick how we do that. It's pretty simple. What we're going to do is we're going to take our micrometer and we're going to take a measurement right here on the base circle. So the base circle is going to be, here's your lobe, and the base circle, if we take a measurement right here, we're going to get the actual base circle of the lobe here. So I'm going to measure this base circle right here, my micrometer, and that's going to give me my initial reading, and then we'll do the lobe itself and we'll do the math. Okay, so our base circle reading on this, we're using a 1 to 2 mic, so we have 1 inch already. Read our micrometer here. I have 1 inch 432. 1.432. Now I'm going to write that down. Our base circle measurement is 1 inch 432 thousandths. Then we're going to take our micrometer and we're going to measure the lobe itself. Now the lobe is actually going to be, we're going to take a measurement this way, which means we're measuring the base circle down here and we're measuring the length of the lobe. If we measure that and then we subtract the difference, that's going to give us our lift on this cam. And then we want to look at the lift and make sure that it matches our cam card. 688. So 1 inch 688. So we'll take that and write it down. 1.688. So we have 1 inch 688 for our lobe, and then 1 inch 432 for our base circle. If we subtract the difference between those two, that's going to tell us our cam's lobe lift. That gives us a lobe lift of 256, which means that the lobe is going to push the lifter 256 thousandths. Now that's not our final valve lift because we have another factor in here, and that is rocker arm ratio. The rocker arms have an offset fulcrum which multiplies the lift. So in order to get our valve lift, we have to multiply our lobe lift times our rocker arm ratio and figure out how that rocker is going to multiply this lift at the rocker. A 4.0 Jeep has a rocker ratio of 1.6. That means it's a 1 to 6 ratio. So what we need to do is we need to take our lobe lift, and the way you find out rocker ratio is you kind of got to know what it is. Like with the Jeep, I just Googled it. Like I know Chevrolet has a stock ratio of 1.5, Ford is 1.6. Big block Chevy's like 1.7 from the factory, so you can look all that information up. We have a 1.6 ratio on our rocker arms on our little Jeep engine here. So we take our lobe lift and we multiply it by 1.6, and that's going to tell us how far the rocker is actually going to push the valve. So 256 times 1.6, if we do the math here, .256 times 1.6 is 409. This cam has a lift of 409 thousandths, which is just a little bit bigger than what the stock cam would be in this engine. So I think the stock cam was like 380 something. So it's just a little one step above, a little bit more lift and duration. But the nice thing is what I've done now is I've verified. I've got 409.6 or 409.6. The cam card says that the lift should be 410 on this cam. So I mean, we're right there. That tells me that this is the right cam. One of the reasons you do this is because sometimes you might get a cam that's been misboxed. I've had that happen before. When you get into higher performance engines, what we want to do, like the FE stroker we're going to go through and degree the entire cam and dial it in, because that's a performance engine and that's a much more expensive build. We're going to make sure that we take the time to actually degree the cam on that. But this is a good quick check that tells you, if your cam card, like in this case, our cam card says that our lift is 410, and we got 409. Yeah, you're there. The mic, there could be 1,000th variation just by the way you hold the mic and stuff. But if you're in the ballpark, if you're plus or minus 2 or 3 thousandths from 410, there's a good bet that is the right cam. So, because that mic reading can vary 1,000 or 2 depending on how you hold the mic. So, but if you measure it and then you get something like 380 or 460 or something, then you're like, oh, whoa, time out. This is not anywhere near what the cam card says, so it could be misboxed. Something could be wrong with the cam. So we've actually verified that our lift really is very close to what it's actually right on where it should be. So I'm happy with that. I'm satisfied that this is the correct camshaft that the box says it is. All right, so installing the camshaft, you never want to put these things in dry. And also the other thing is you want to be real careful putting this in that you don't gouge a bearing or anything here. These cam bearings, we already pre-fit this cam when we know it fits, but you just want to be real careful when you put it in. And I like to have the access from the bottom side. I've got the bottom side open here, so I can kind of reach in from the bottom there and kind of help this thing go in gently. So let's go ahead and get this in, and then we'll get our timing set on. We want to make sure that a generous amount of lube on these lobes. Make sure these cam lobes, this is a flat tappet cam, and it's going to need a high zinc oil, and this is broken in, so we want to give this cam, make sure it has a fighting chance to live. Make sure you get plenty of lube on those lobes as this thing goes in. Also, the distributor gear, we want to put a generous amount of lube on that. We don't ever want that to be dry. Okay, and we're gently just going to work this in. And just lube these up as you go. Now I can reach in from the back side here, and I have access, so I can kind of help this thing from the back here. Just kind of gently work it into those bearings, making sure we don't damage or gouge anything. You never want to force this cam in. It should go in real easy. Loop up our last 3 lobes here, and we're going to be in business. Don't be shy with this assembly lube. Make sure you use a generous amount. definitely better to have a little extra than not enough. See, now I'm getting down to where I got to really kind of finagle the cam, but like I said, I can reach right back in here and I can just help it and just very gently get that cam into those bearings. This is not something you want to get in a hurry on. You need to just make sure it goes in nice and easy once you get to that point. Okay, our cam's in. It rotates. It's going to have a little more resistance because of that thick assembly lube, but we know it turned because we put it in before. So our cam is installed in the engine. That's about all there is to that. Hey guys, so now that we've got the cam in the engine, we want to take a look at our Engine Pro timing set. Because, I mean, obviously the cam and the crank have to be tied together. Well, we've still got our old gear on here, and we don't really want to use that. We've got a brand new gear set from Engine Pro. This gear is pressed on, so we're going to need to use a puller to get it off. So I'm going to put my puller on here, we'll get that gear off, and then we'll put in our brand new Engine Pro steel timing set. These are pretty good quality timing sets. They work really well. So we'll get that off and then we'll get that in. Another thing is we have an oil gallery plug here. Don't ever forget to put that plug in. Many years ago, back when I knew everything, I put a timing set on a small block. This is probably 20 some odd years ago. And I forgot to put the plugs in because I got in a hurry. Well, once the gear goes on there, it covers up that hole, out of sight, out of mind. Got the engine in the car and it had no oil pressure. Unfortunately, the customer didn't prime the oil pump. He actually started the motor and let it run for 15 minutes trying to get the oil pressure up and spun all the bearings on the crank. Unfortunately, it was my fault, so I had to give him all his money back. So, needless to say, I've never done that again. So we want to make sure we put these plugs in, really important. In our plug kit, it comes with new plugs for this. A pipe plug that's screwed in. Now some guys will put sealer on these plugs. If you're under the timing cover here, you don't need to seal this plug. If this plug seeps a little bit of oil into the timing chain area, we don't care. It's still going to have plenty of oil pressure. If it's seeping oil, that's just a little extra lube on that timing chain, and they're not going to seep much. They might just seep a little. So we want to get that in with no sealer on it. Now on the exterior portions of the block where you have plugs like this, you definitely need to put some type of a Teflon or Loctite sealer on these because they will seep oil to the outside, and that's, you know, no bueno. If you get that plug in, take a good Allen wrench and get that thing as tight as you can get it, and it's going to be just fine. So that plug is in there. It is not coming out. All right, we'll get our puller on here and get that old gear off and put the new stuff on. So I put my puller on here, and I wasn't aware of this, but I don't think these are pressed on very tight because I started turning it by hand, and that gear just kind of slid off of there. So apparently it's not all that tight of a fit with these 4.0s. I probably knew that at one point, but I probably forgot about that. So we got our old gear off, and of course we're just going to discard that or save it for some kind of a ornamental project. This is our new gear. Now you want to make sure that you put this on correctly because there's a timing mark on this gear, and of course I always put a yellow mark on it there. There's our timing mark. The timing mark has to go to the outside. You never want to put it on like that. So, and you also don't want to put this on dry. So we're going to put just a little bit of lube on that area of the crank where it's stepped up, and then we're going to put our gear on. And sometimes you got to use a tool to press these on or whatever, but on this one, it just goes right up against the crank. And of course, the balancer is going to sit up against that and hold it on when we get this thing together. So that's actually one of the easier ones that I put on. Now, let's talk about how to set this timing up. The timing on the 4.0 is dot to dot. That means that the dot on the crankshaft down here needs to match the dot on your cam gear. So the best way to put this on, I see some guys, you know, try to get the chain on here and they really struggle with this. Don't do that. What you need to do on this First of all, what you need to do is find your dang bolts for your gear. So we'll take our handy dandy tool that we use for rotating the crank, and we're just going to rotate that crank around until we get our mark lined up with the mark on the cam, which is right there. So those marks are lined up, and we take a straight edge or something straight, you can actually see that those marks are lined up dot to dot. Now that you get that done, you want to take this back off carefully without moving the cam, and we can hang our chain on there. So we want to gently take that off. We know the cam is located correctly. And then we're just going to hang our chain on this guy right here. And then you want to gently put that chain back on so that these are lined up, and we can kind of eyeball it and see that those two marks are lined up, and this are actually off a tooth there. So let's go over one more link. And right there, those marks are lined up, and since they're lined up, this should go right onto the pin, and it did. It went right on the pin. So there's our marks. Then you take your cam bolt, put it on and torque it, and you're in business. We got dot to dot here, so we know that this thing is timed correctly, and your piston on number 1 should be at top dead center, and it is. So that's right where the timing needs to be. You got to make sure it's dot to dot. Another thing, we'll go ahead and torque that. Another thing that you need to do is there's an oil slinger that goes here. You want to make sure that that goes back on, because that's kind of a shield. It helps shield the seal on the front cover here. So we want to make sure that that oil slinger is back on there just like that. And that's how your timing set should look on this thing when you get it set up. After that, so we'll torque that, and after that then we'll be able to put our front cover on. Go on from there. Also like to mark my bolts after I torque them just to make sure I do. Alright, so we got the timing chain timed correctly, we got it set up, we checked our cam, got our cam installed, we got our plug in, now we can think about putting our cover on. So on the Jeep cover, what you'll notice is it actually has a little plastic chain tensioner type deal that goes in here, and this just fits right inside these slots here. It just fits right in there in those slots like that, and that's just to keep that a little more tension on the chain. Another thing we need to do is we need to install our front seal here in the cover, and the cover's basically going to go on just like that. I always like to take and just take some kind of a seal driver or something and just kind of gently press these in on the press. I took it over to the other shop and did that. What you don't want to do is pound this in with a hammer because you could damage it. So once you got your chain tensioner on, your seal in, it's also really important to make sure that you lubricate that seal. We never want to put this stuff in here dry. So I'm just going to take some of this assembly lube and make sure I'm generous with it on this seal. So we want to make sure we don't want to tear the seal by having it dry, so we'll put it on like that. So once you get your cover ready to go like that, then we're going to take get our gasket on here. I put some of these bolts in just to get my gasket to stay. Now another thing we have here on the 4.0 is the center bolt of the cam actually has a hole in it, and there's a spring and a little pin that goes in there, and what that is that's just kind of a thrust precaution for the cam. So the spring goes in there first, and then this pin goes in, and when the cover goes on there, so you can see that's spring loaded right there. When the cover goes on, that pin just rides up against this little dimple on the cover here, right on there like that. So we've got something for our cam to thrust back and forth with. It's a pretty good idea that they had with this. Okay, so the next step, this is pretty critical. So we got our timing cover on here, but you don't want to tighten this up, and you can see it's pushing up against that spring-loaded pin in the cam. But we want to have a little bit of movement on this cover here because there's no dowel pins that locate this particular cover. And so in order to get the seal centered to our hub on our balancer, we need to put our balancer on while this is still just on there loosely. And then of course, once we get the balancer on there, then we can tighten this up, and that centers the seal. Always put a little bit of lube on this hub. We don't want to put it in dry, inside and outside. So we want to put just a little assembly lube on that on both sides. And then we're just going to very carefully install our balancer on the engine. Now, some of these are a press fit. The one on the 4-liter is not. So we want to get it in there. And you can take something and just gently tap this if you want to. So once you get the balancer on, and I recommend you use one of these tools here. This is a balancer installation tool. It's a pretty standard tool. You can rent it at some of the parts stores. Even though this is not a press fit, I like to use this because I don't want to beat on that balancer. I don't want to hit that thing because you beat against the thrust bearing and so forth. So you got the balancer on, and you notice our front cover is loose here, right? We have some play here. Well, the reason I do that is because we want that seal centered. So if we get the balancer on into the seal, and then we tighten this up and kind of center this, it's going to give us, a really good, otherwise your seal could leak. If the balancer is not centered on that seal, it could leak. So go ahead and get your balancer on, and then kind of make sure you're kind of center this, and it'll self-center here, and then just tighten your bolts up. That's the best way to do that. So we'll snug these bolts up, get them torqued, and that will assure that your seal is centered. When you don't have a dowel pin that locates the cover, a lot of times that's the way you have to do this. We'll get those torqued and move on. We're going to do a valve job on this cylinder head. We will probably reuse the valves on this one because I mic the stems on them and they're good. Of course, we got a lot of cleanup to do. We got to regrind the valves. The cylinder head, I still got to clean this up with a wire brush, and then we're going to Magnaflux it. And then of course the springs, we're not going to reuse those. My advice is don't ever use springs. The springs are really critical for valve opening and closing and the engine's RPM capability and so forth. These springs are, a few dollars a piece. Don't ever put used springs on. That's just not a good practice. So normally we would replace the valves. This customer's on a pretty tight budget, and the valves are actually in really good shape, pristine. None of them were actually leaking when they took this apart. I did a vacuum test on the head. The head was actually good. The valves were all seating and sealing, but we're going to go ahead, Magnaflux the head to make sure it's not cracked. We're going to recut the valves and seats and true up those seating surfaces on the valves and the seats. And the guides also, a lot of times these smaller stem valves, the guides are really good on this. I actually put a small bore gauge in there and checked the guide clearances, and the guide clearances, it's just, there's no reason to put guides in this head because the guides are just so good that the clearances are still within factory specs. And so we're just going to go ahead and leave the guides alone because this head is in great shape. This was actually a really low mileage engine, and so yeah. So in our next video, that's it basically for the short block. Hopefully, if you have any questions, ask below. In our next video, we're going to go over to the cylinder head shop, which is at another location. We don't do any machining or anything in the assembly area here, so we'll get over to the other shop for the next video, and we will start actually doing the cylinder head work on this thing. And so I appreciate you watching. Make sure you support this channel. Go to my Patreon site. It's Patreon, vintageiron.com, and I'll put a link down below. I'm asking for support from everybody. I appreciate it, so we can do a lot of cool builds. Next build after this one, once we get this done, it's going to be the 390 stroker for Michael Ryder, and then it's on to the LS motor. So we're in engine building mode now here in Arizona. I will talk to you very soon, I promise, and thank you for watching.